September 16, 1943, Takina Airstrip, Bougainville Island. The tropical air trembles under the roar of piston engines. Captain James Swett, commander of a weathered Corsair squadron, watches helplessly as his wingman's aircraft spirals toward the jungle canopy, a black column of smoke marking the crash. 1 second the radio is filled with frantic yelling. The next, silence. Another pilot gone, not to mechanical failure, not to enemy brilliance, but to something far more frustrating: ineffective firepower. In the past week alone, VMF 213, nicknamed the Hellhawks, has lost 3 aircraft to Japanese Zeros. Swett reviews his own gun camera film in the mess tent that night. Hundreds of tracer rounds streak past a Zero, perfectly bracketing it. Above, below, and to both sides, but not a single hit lands. For 100 rounds fired, not one fatal strike. 2 minutes later, that same Zero circled back and shot down Swett's partner. The footage is painful to watch, a perfect circle of death with a hole in the center. On paper, the F4U Corsair is unmatched 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 3,000 rounds, and a monstrous 2,000 horsepower engine. Yet the numbers don't lie. Marine pilots are averaging barely 3 kills for every loss. The aircraft's bullets, despite their power, scatter harmlessly in the sky. Each Corsair can sustain 25 seconds of continuous fire, but that ammunition evaporates fast and rarely connects. Pilots return home frustrated, their gun barrels hot, their ammo boxes empty, their scoreboards blank. Swett isn't alone in his frustration. Across Marine squadrons, the kill-to-ammo ratio is catastrophic: 890 rounds fired for every confirmed kill. Commanders blame pilot inexperience. Engineers blame combat stress. No one suspects the problem lies not in the man or the machine, but in a number, a single measurement of distance that decides life or death. Hidden in the Corsair's technical manual is the real culprit: gun convergence, the distance at which all 6 guns' bullets are designed to meet. Factory settings demand those bullets converge at 1,000 feet, a compromise designed by engineers far from combat. In theory, it allows pilots to fire from a safe distance. In practice, it means the bullets form a wide circle, 30 feet across, by the time they reach the target. The Japanese Zero, with a wingspan of only 29 feet, slips right through that invisible gap. Every burst of fire becomes a futile light show across the Pacific sky. As Swett stares at the gun camera reels in disbelief, he doesn't notice a quiet figure in the background. A mechanic with grease-stained hands studying the same footage. He isn't a pilot, not an officer, not even an engineer. But what he's about to do in secret will change the entire war. Inside a dimly lit maintenance tent, Staff Sergeant Mickey McCarthy wipes gun oil off his hands and listens as pilots argue over missed shots and wasted ammunition. He isn't supposed to speak. Mechanics don't debate tactics, but his mind refuses to let go of what he saw on Captain Swett's gun camera footage. Every miss, every wasted round, forms a pattern in his head. McCarthy's job is supposed to end when the plane takes off, yet he knows the problem starts before it ever leaves the ground. McCarthy grew up fixing cars in a Boston garage before the Depression drove him into the Marines. He never studied engineering, but he understood machines, their logic, their rhythm, their flaws. He'd learned early that every machine has a sweet spot, the point where mechanics and physics align. To him, the Corsair's problem was mechanical, not human. The pilots weren't bad shots. Their bullets simply weren't meeting where they should. Late that evening, McCarthy requests access to the Corsair's gun harmonization manual, a technical document no enlisted man usually touches. The armory clerk hesitates before handing it over. "You planning to rebuild the plane, Mickey?" he jokes. McCarthy doesn't answer. He reads every line, tracing the printed diagrams with his calloused fingers. The math is simple, the logic flawed. At 1,000 feet, the bullets meet perfectly on paper, but in the air, targets move, and that perfection becomes chaos. He spends the next hour measuring every detail of a grounded Corsair, the spacing of the 6 Browning machine guns, the angle of their mounts, the distance between the wingtips. The numbers paint a brutal truth. The convergence point is too far away. At 1,000 feet, the Japanese Zero can move hundreds of feet before the bullets arrive. It isn't that the Marines can't shoot. It's that they're firing into empty sky where the target used to be. McCarthy runs the figures in his head like mental geometry. What if the convergence weren't at 1,000 feet? What if it were at 300? At that range, the bullets would strike faster, tighter, harder. The spread would shrink from a dinner table circle to the size of a man's chest. A 1-second burst could tear an enemy aircraft apart. But the manuals warned against it. Too much stress, too much recoil, too much risk. McCarthy closes the manual, jaw set. Then we'll just make it stronger, he mutters. He waits until the flight line is empty. The air smells of salt and oil. With 2 trusted crewmen, Corporal Eddie Wilkins and Private Tommy Reyes, he rolls Captain Swett's Corsair into the hangar. Under flickering work lights, McCarthy begins a night-long act of quiet rebellion. Out come the wrenches, the hacksaws, and a pile of scrap steel. The plan: re-angle every gun to converge not at 1,000 feet, but 300. The risk: if the theory is wrong, the wings could rip themselves apart mid-flight. By dawn, the hangar smells of gunpowder and sweat. The guns now point inward, their angles sharper than any regulation allows. McCarthy wipes his hands and stares at what he's done. If he's right, he's just built the deadliest Corsair in the Pacific. If he's wrong, someone's going to die. Morning breaks over Bougainville with the dull rumble of engines warming up. Captain James "Jim" Swett strides across the flight line, boots crunching on coral dust, still mourning the loss of his wingman. When he reaches his Corsair, he stops dead. The gun barrels look wrong. They're angled inward far more than standard. His mechanic, Staff Sergeant McCarthy, stands nearby, hands clasped behind his back like a man awaiting judgment. "What the hell did you do to my plane, Sergeant?" Swett demands. McCarthy stands at attention, unflinching. "Adjusted your gun convergence, sir." Swett narrows his eyes. "To what distance?" 300 feet, McCarthy replies. The air between them turns electric. That's half the minimum limit. Illegal, reckless, career-ending. You realize that's a violation of every maintenance regulation in the Corps? Swett presses. "Yes, sir," McCarthy answers quietly. "Then why?" Swett asks. McCarthy looks him straight in the eye. "Because the manual's killing us." Swett stares at his plane, thinking of the men he's lost. Pilots who never came home because their guns scattered like confetti. The brass won't approve of this. But maybe, just maybe, it's the miracle they've been waiting for. He slides on his gloves, climbs into the cockpit, and mutters, "If this thing comes apart, you're explaining it to my widow." McCarthy allows himself a small smile. "If it works, sir, you won't have one." At 8:30 hours, for Corsairs lift off for routine patrol over Empress Augusta Bay. The radio chatter is calm, until radar calls in 9 enemy contacts approaching fast. 6 Zeros and 3 dive bombers. Swett pushes the throttle forward. His Corsair surges ahead, diving from 18,000 feet toward the enemy formation. He doesn't fire yet. He waits. 600 yards. 400. 350. The zero begins to jink. Swett exhales, steadies his hand, and presses the trigger. For the first time, the tracers don't scatter. They form a solid, glowing beam that slices through the zero like a torch through paper. In less than a second, the Japanese fighter disintegrates. Wings ripped clean off, fuselage engulfed in flame. Swett jerks his stick to avoid the debris cloud. His voice breaks over the radio. Half disbelief, half awe. "Holy mother of..." He doesn't finish. Another zero fills his gun sight. Another burst. Another kill. The Pacific sky turns into a storm of falling wreckage. In just 45 seconds, Swett downs 3 enemy planes using barely 200 rounds. His wingmen are still lining up their first shots. By the time the battle ends, all 8 Japanese aircraft are destroyed. Swett's plane returns untouched, half its ammunition still loaded. When he lands, mechanics and pilots swarm the runway, eyes locked on his smoking gun barrels. McCarthy steps forward silently. Swett climbs out, pulls off his helmet, and says the words that will echo across every squadron in the Pacific. "Whatever you did, Sergeant, do it to every plane we have." That evening, While engineers draft memos and officers argue about regulations, 3 mechanics begin the most important night shift in marine aviation history. The secret's out, and the race to arm every Corsair with McCarthy's 300-foot miracle has begun. The sun sinks behind the jungle ridge, and Bougainville's airfield glows with the eerie light of generator lamps. Every Corsair sits lined up like sleeping beasts, their engines cooling, their wings folded tight. Around them, McCarthy's ordnance crew begins its quiet revolution. Hammers ring softly, welding sparks flicker in the humid air. What's happening tonight isn't just maintenance. It's mutiny disguised as repair. McCarthy's team works in total silence. They know the risks. If anyone reports them, they'll be court-martialed before sunrise. But none of them hesitate. Each gun mount is stripped down, re-angled, and reinforced with steel plates salvaged from damaged aircraft. The math is exact. Every degree matters. Every weld could decide whether the plane flies or tears itself apart under recoil. McCarthy checks each gun alignment personally, muttering numbers like a prayer. 2.4 degrees inward, dead center at 300 feet. By midnight, the hangar smells of gun oil, sweat, and burned metal. Swett's Corsair gleams in the corner, already armed and ready. The proof that the impossible works. McCarthy pauses to wipe his forehead. He's exhausted but focused. There's no manual to follow, no blueprint to copy. Just instinct, courage, and the stubborn belief that the engineers were wrong. In the background, Corporal Wilkins hums softly, the rhythm of tools and resolve blending into a strange wartime lullaby. Outside, the officers' quarters glow faintly in the distance. Inside them, heated arguments echo through the night. Senior engineers citing memos, warning of structural stress, demanding immediate shutdown of unauthorized modifications. But the airfield is beyond their control now. The pilots have seen what happens when a Corsair's bullets actually meet their mark. Paper regulations mean nothing against a mechanic who just changed the kill ratio of the war. One by one, Corsairs roll into position for testing. McCarthy sights each gun against a crude wooden frame set exactly 300 feet away, painted with a single white cross. When all 6 machine guns align perfectly on that target, he nods to his men. Next, they adjust another and another until 22 aircraft are tuned to the same deadly convergence. By dawn, the Hellhawks are ready to fly, transformed from frustrated survivors into precision killers. As the first light touches the jungle, McCarthy looks over the flight line. 22 Corsairs shimmering in the rising sun, their gun barrels gleaming like polished silver. He knows the paperwork will condemn him, but the results will save hundreds of lives. If they court-martial me, he says quietly, at least they'll have to do it after the war. Behind him, engines start to roar, pilots eager to test what he's built. What happens next will rewrite the rules of aerial combat. The Japanese expect scattered fire and easy prey. Instead, they're about to face something new. A wall of lead so dense it erases the sky. September 20th, 1943. Late morning. The tropical haze above Empress Augusta Bay shimmers with heat. 8 Corsairs from VMF 213, freshly armed with McCarthy's 300-foot convergence, climb through the broken cloud layers. The air is thick with anticipation. Over the radio, the chatter is clipped and calm, the way men sound when they know something historic might happen. Below them, Allied landing craft scatter across the blue-green waters of Bougainville. Above them, the enemy is coming. Radar intercept. 12 Japanese Zeros escorting 8 Betty bombers inbound from Rabaul. The Corsairs bank to intercept. Captain James Swett leads the formation, his fingers twitching on the trigger. He knows his plane isn't the same anymore. It feels alive, coiled, hungry. At 12,000 feet, the 2 formations meet head-on. The sky erupts into chaos. Twisting contrails, flashing tracers, the thunder of .50 caliber fire. Swett picks a Betty bomber at the edge of the formation and dives straight at it. He squeezes the trigger at 320 feet, a range every manual calls suicide distance. But instead of scattered shots, his tracers fuse into a solid beam of light. The rounds tear into the bomber's right wing, The entire section detonates in fire. In seconds, the plane disintegrates, falling in burning fragments. Swett's voice crackles over the radio. "Scratch one, Betty." Lieutenant Robert Hansen locks onto a Zero climbing toward him. He fires a 1-second burst. The Zero disintegrates mid-roll. Its cockpit vanishes in a flash, wings snapping clean off. For the first time in months, the Hellhawks feel what it's like to dominate the air. There's no guesswork now, just pure, concentrated lethality. Pilots shout over the radio, their disbelief turning into laughter. They can't dodge it. They can't dodge it. Within 12 minutes, the battle is over. 15 enemy aircraft destroyed. Not a single Corsair lost. Mechanics and intelligence officers gather around gun camera reels later that day, watching in stunned silence as footage shows Zeros vanishing under unified streams of fire. For once, the math of combat favors the Marines. Ammunition expenditure drops from 890 rounds per kill to under 200. The airfield erupts in cheers as word spreads, "McCarthy's fix works." By nightfall, requests pour in from nearby squadrons VMF 214, VMF 124, and VMF 221, all demanding the same modification. Pilots call it the 300-foot miracle. Engineers call it unauthorized tampering. McCarthy calls it common sense. He doesn't speak at the celebrations. He just stands at the edge of the runway, watching the sunset reflect off the Corsair wings he changed forever. But victory comes with consequences. The same officers who once begged for solutions now demand answers, and someone to blame. McCarthy's revolution has made him a hero to the pilots and a criminal to command. The next morning, the investigation begins. The celebration barely ends before the storm begins. By sunrise, the airfield hums with tension instead of cheers. A convoy of jeeps arrives from Marine Aircraft Group 11 headquarters, carrying clipboard-wielding engineers and angry officers. Their mission: find out who authorized the unauthorized. Captain Swett's Corsair still sits on the runway, gun barrels blackened and hot, a silent witness to yesterday's miracle. The men who saw it can't stop talking. The men in charge want someone's head. Major Wade Britt, commander of VMF 213, stands between his pilots and the approaching storm of bureaucracy. He's proud but cautious. Across the field, Lieutenant Colonel William Millington, the same officer who issued the memo forbidding convergence below 500 feet, steps out of his jeep holding a folder thick with regulations. His expression could slice metal. "Who adjusted these aircraft?" he demands. No one answers. Then McCarthy steps forward, steady and unflinching. "I did, sir." Millington's voice is ice. "You modified government property, violated standing orders, and risked structural failure of Marine aircraft." McCarthy doesn't move. "Yes, sir." "You understand the consequences?" "Yes, sir." "Then explain why." McCarthy meets his eyes. "Because the regulations were wrong, sir. And because men were dying while engineers argued." The airfield goes silent. Even the wind seems to pause. Captain Swett steps forward. "Sir, permission to speak." Millington snaps. "Denied." Swett ignores him. "Before McCarthy's fix, I fired 400 rounds and missed. After his fix, I shot down 5 enemy aircraft with 200 rounds. That's not luck, sir. That's engineering done right." Other pilots nod, murmuring their support. Millington slams his folder shut. "One flight proves nothing. Stress fractures develop over time. These planes will crack under pressure. You'll kill yourselves before the Japanese have the chance." Major Britt cuts in. "With respect, Colonel, our men just survived a 15-1 dogfight without a single loss. If that's unsafe, I'll take unsafe every day." Millington's face reddens. "You're insubordinate." Britt crosses his arms. "Then court-martial me after we win this war." The exchange hangs heavy in the humid air, the sound of rank clashing with results. McCarthy, standing quietly in the center, knows the truth. What's right in war isn't always what's written. Millington turns to leave, muttering, "This will go to General Geiger." Britt replies, "Good. Save me the paperwork." Then he looks at McCarthy. "Sergeant, Can you modify the rest of our aircraft? McCarthy hesitates, glancing toward the furious colonel driving away. Yes, sir. All 22 by morning. Britt nods once. Then do it. The brass can write reports, we'll write history. That night, sparks fly again inside the hangar. The Hellhawks don't wait for permission. By dawn, every Corsair at Bougainville will roar with McCarthy's forbidden precision, and the Japanese won't live long enough to file a complaint. Dawn, September 21st, 1943. The humid air vibrates with the thunder of engines. 22 Corsairs from VMF 213 line up across the Bougainville runway, each aircraft armed, fueled, and carrying McCarthy's 300-foot convergence. The pilots call them the concentrated ones. Mechanics stand back, covering their ears as propellers scream. For the first time, every man here knows the odds have shifted. The Japanese may still outnumber them, but now the Marines have something far more lethal than numbers: precision. At 11:40 a.m., radar intercepts another wave, 12 Zeros and 8 Betty bombers approaching from the northwest. Major Wade Britt gives a simple order over the radio. Let's see what Mickey built. The Corsairs climb fast through cloud breaks, sun flashing off their wings. Below, the sea glitters like glass. When the two forces finally meet above Empress Augusta Bay, the sky explodes with chaos. Twisting aircraft, screaming engines, and lines of fire that no longer miss. Lieutenant Hansen dives through the formation. He picks a Betty, lines up perfectly at 300 feet, and fires a 2-second burst. The bomber erupts into a rolling inferno, right wing folding backward like paper. A second later, the entire aircraft vanishes in a flash of fuel vapor. Hansen banks sharply left, smoke trailing past his canopy. She's gone, he says flatly into the radio. No triumph, just awe. Captain Swett closes in on a trio of Zeros turning hard to escape. He waits 350 feet, 320, then squeezes the trigger. The Corsair's 6 Brownings ignite as one. The tracers don't spread or wander. They slice clean through the enemy wingman. In a heartbeat, the Zero snaps in half, the pieces tumbling end over end toward the sea. Swett adjusts, fires again, and the second Zero vanishes in a burst of vaporized fuel. 2 down, he murmurs. Still plenty left. In 12 minutes, the battle turns one-sided. 9 Zeros and 6 bombers fall. The remaining Japanese scatter, diving for cloud cover, radios filled with panic. On the ground, observers watch the sky rain black smoke and burning aluminum. When the Corsairs return to base, the airfield erupts in disbelief. 15 confirmed kills, 0 losses. The gun camera footage will later show what no one had ever seen before. The Corsairs' firepower forming a continuous beam of destruction, cutting through the Pacific air like a laser before lasers existed. By that evening, word spreads across every Marine outpost in the Solomons. Pilots from other squadrons rush to Bougainville to see the miracle firsthand. Reports are radioed to Rabaul, Guadalcanal, and Espiritu Santo. Engineers refuse to believe the results until they see the gun camera reels themselves. It's impossible, one mutters. Another replies, then explain those wrecks in the bay. For the Japanese, confusion turns to fear. Intercepted radio messages describe the new Corsairs in chilling terms. Their bullets form a wall. If they point at you, you die. The name catches on among the pilots, the Wall of Fire. Within a week, the success of the Bougainville modification reaches Washington. Reports flood from Pacific squadrons. Kill ratios tripled, ammunition efficiency quadrupled, and pilot survival rates soaring. Yet by the time those reports reach the desks of senior officers, the story has already been rewritten. Headquarters calls it the Revised Ballistics Harmonization Program, developed by Bureau of Aeronautics Engineering staff. The paperwork says the idea came from field testing, not from a sergeant with a wrench. Back on Bougainville, Staff Sergeant McCarthy doesn't know any of this. He's too busy working. Every night, he and his crew inspect the Corsairs, replacing spent barrels and reinforcing brackets. He's exhausted, sunburned, and running on coffee. But he smiles when he sees the pilots return. Alive, confident, victorious. That's reward enough. When reporters arrive weeks later to film The Heroes of the Solomons, no one interviews the man behind the guns. He's not on the list. By October 1943, the modification has become standard across Marine squadrons. VMF 214, the legendary Black Sheep Squadron, adopts McCarthy's 300-foot harmonization. Their commander, Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, praises the improvement in combat reports but credits recent engineering corrections. The men know better, but no one says a word. War doesn't reward innovation, it rewards hierarchy. In November, a memo arrives from headquarters. All further field adjustments to armament alignment are to be conducted under official supervision. No unauthorized mechanical alterations permitted. The irony isn't lost on the pilots. The same command that condemned McCarthy's modification now claims ownership of it. The engineers who once warned it would destroy aircraft now print manuals calling it an essential correction to gunnery geometry. When the official harmonization manual is released in March 1944, it lists the specifications precisely as McCarthy set them. Convergence at 300 feet, reinforced mounts, recalibrated wing angles, but the author line reads, compiled by Boer Field Engineering Division. McCarthy's name is nowhere. To history, it's as if the sergeant never existed. But among the pilots, the truth spreads quietly through handshakes, mess tent stories, and word of mouth. That Christmas, Captain Swett raises a toast in the squadron tent. To Mickey McCarthy, he says, holding his tin mug high, the deadliest Marine who never fired a shot. The tent erupts in cheers and laughter. McCarthy blushes, trying to wave it off. I just tightened a few bolts, he mutters. But everyone there knows the truth. He didn't just tighten bolts. He tightened the odds of survival for hundreds of men. When the war ends, there's no medal, no promotion, no ceremony. McCarthy leaves the Marines as quietly as he arrived, unaware that his idea will outlive him, copied in every American fighter that follows. The war ends in 1945, and the Pacific goes silent. The Corsairs that once ruled the skies now sit lined along airstrips, engines cooling for the last time. Staff Sergeant Mickey McCarthy signs his discharge papers and boards a transport ship home. No medal, no ceremony, just a handshake and a form letter thanking him for exemplary maintenance performance. To the Marine Corps, he's a line item. To the pilots, he's the reason they're alive. Boston, winter 1946. Snow dusts the narrow streets of Southie. McCarthy opens a small garage on Dorchester Avenue, the same kind of place where he once fixed cars before the war. Locals know him as the quiet Marine who never talks about combat. When customers ask what he did overseas, he just shrugs. Loaded ammunition. Nothing special. What he doesn't say is that those rounds changed the way the world fights. While McCarthy fixes carburetors and fan belts, engineers at Wright Field, Ohio, and North American Aviation begin testing new harmonization standards for post-war aircraft. The data comes straight from Bougainville, from his design. The P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt, and P-38 Lightning all adopt tighter convergence ranges inspired by field adjustments from 1943. No one mentions who made them. The concept becomes doctrine. Concentrate fire, shorten range, increase kill probability. Decades later, the principle still holds. Jet fighters like the F-86 Sabre, F-16 Fighting Falcon, and F-35 Lightning II all rely on close-range ballistic convergence, a direct descendant of McCarthy's midnight experiment. Every trigger pull, every burst of concentrated fire in modern air combat traces its lineage to one sleepless night in a Pacific hangar. Yet no museum plaque, no textbook, and no documentary mentions the sergeant who discovered it. In 1979, McCarthy dies quietly of a heart attack at age 62. His obituary in the Boston Globe is 3 sentences long. It mentions that he was a Marine Corps veteran, nothing more. His wife, Helen, keeps a single photograph on their mantel. Mickey, grease on his uniform, standing beside a Corsair under a Pacific sun. She never knows that the man in that photograph altered the geometry of war. 8 years later, in 1987, the Marine Corps Aviation Association installs a bronze plaque at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. It honors unsung heroes of marine aviation. 87 names are etched in bronze. Near the bottom, barely visible, one line reads, SSG Michael McCarthy, VMF 213, Ordnance Crew. No context, no story. But every Marine pilot who passes that wall pauses, just for a moment. They know. History moves on, but the truth remains. Sometimes the men who save the most lives are the ones nobody remembers. And sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't the gun. It's the man who knows how to make it work. Nearly 80 years later, a graduate student researching marine aviation at the National Archives opens a forgotten box labeled VMF 213, 1943 field reports. Inside are brittle logbooks, grease-stained papers, and a stack of gun camera film canisters. In the margin of one maintenance entry, written in faded pencil, are 3 words, adjusted to 300. Beneath it, a signature M. J. McCarthy. The researcher circles the name and whispers, "Who was this guy?" When the footage is restored, it shows exactly what the reports described. Corsairs firing beams of unbroken tracers, enemy aircraft exploding in perfect synchronization. Historians confirm the harmonization data matches every post-1943 gunnery standard. For the first time, the field notes connect the dots between official doctrine and the man who created it in secret. What began as an act of defiance is finally recognized as the moment modern air combat was born. In 2023, the Marine Corps quietly updates its digital archives. A new annotation appears beneath the entry for the F4U Corsair Armament Manual. Field innovation originated by Staff Sergeant Michael J. McCarthy, VMF 213, Bougainville, September 1943. It isn't a medal. It isn't a statue. But it's something. A line of truth that finally breaks through 80 years of silence. Every generation of Marine aviator now learns about him during training. They study how one enlisted mechanic ignored the rulebook and trusted math, instinct, and courage instead. In classrooms at Pensacola and Miramar, instructors tell the story not as legend, but as doctrine, proof that innovation doesn't always wear officer's stripes. The Corsair itself becomes a symbol of ingenuity born from desperation. The sleek, gull-winged fighter that once carried doubt now carries legend. Veterans' descendants visit the museum plaque, tracing their fingers over McCarthy's small, engraved name. They whisper the same words Captain Swett once said in 1943, to Mickey McCarthy, the deadliest Marine who never fired a shot. Outside, a preserved F4U Corsair gleams in the afternoon sun. Its machine guns are silent now, but their alignment still points inward, perfectly converged at 300 feet, frozen in the geometry of courage. Somewhere, the echo of a wrench turning in a Pacific hangar still lingers. The sound of defiance. The sound of precision. So remember him, Staff Sergeant Michael Joseph McCarthy. A man with no rank, no degree, and no permission, who changed the outcome of a war with nothing but a wrench, a pencil, and the courage to break a rule. Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't written in the sky. They're written in the margins of a maintenance log. If you believe courage isn't about rank but resolve, share his story. Because some heroes win wars not by firing bullets, but by fixing where they land.